Sarah from the Debt Camel, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for inviting me on, Brian.
No problem. When you reached out, I trawled through the internet looking for some stuff that you did, and it turns out you're quite prolific. And I'm surprised I hadn't come across your stuff before you reached out. So I must say, I really like what you do. I love your content. It resonates quite a lot with the stuff that I talk about, but obviously more heavily towards debt. And it's something that's very close to home for me. It's the reason why I create content about money in the first place, because I was stung with debt. So I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, it's so I'm definitely in a niche end of the market, but it's such an important niche.
It is, and it's
Uh,
one that not many people like talking about.
that's
Um,
right. It's quite hard. And if you're just talking about your own experiences, it's great to read personal stories, but it's hard to generalize for people.
yeah,
So it does help, I think, to have somebody that I've been a debt advisor for 20 years. And so it does help to have somebody who can generalize and make more stand back and see the wood from the trees is my general phrase for looking at this.
yeah. No, I agree. Okay, then let's start there. Then so you've been in this sort of industry for 20 years. What first of all got you into that, and then what led you into creating content online on Instagram and your blog?
Okay, well, it was pretty much a complete accident, as so many of the best things in life to turn out to be. So I used to work in the city, and at that point I was a single mum with two children, and my city job was becoming just impossible to manage with home life. So I became a stay-at-home mum. And I wanted something to do which could very easily be confined to term time, and which I could drop at the drop of a hat if the children were ill or whatever reason. So I started volunteering at my local Citizens Advice. And when you become a Citizens Advice volunteer, you have to go through these courses at the start. There's about 8, 9 sections. So things like benefits, housing, employment, consumer rights, immigration. And one of the sections was debt. And I actually found that one the hardest to get to grips with, and also the most interesting. So if you've got somebody with an employment problem or a housing problem, there's a sort of set series of questions you ask. And if this one is interesting, you go down and you ask other questions, and it's fairly formulate which order you go through the information you need before you can start talking about the options somebody's got. Debt has this habit of going all over the place. Even right from the start, you've not just got what people are spending at the moment on their expenses and what their income is, but you've got what the household situation is like and how that might be going to change in future, and whether they could affect not just what they're doing about their debts, but whether they could maximize their income, whether they're getting all the benefits and things they're entitled to. So it kind of goes in all directions. And the actual hard dealing with the debt specific part of it has got a lot of quite technical stuff, which most people never see, but which the debt advisor needs to know for pulling out in the unusual circumstance where a client just fits in this particular niche and there's an unusual suggestion for them. So I just found it fascinating, and I tended to specialize in that. I did all sorts of other stuff at Citizens Advice, because all the volunteers do. But you know, if a debt advice client came through the door and I was around, and I would probably be the person that was asked. So that's what I was doing for several years, quite a few years, and I got tired of seeing people very late in the process. Often people were, you know, grasping letters from debt collectors, letters from bailiffs about council tax. This is often the last problem, which means they've got to go and get debt advice. They've had debt problems for quite a while before that. And people kept saying, why don't you write a book? Well, people with debt probably aren't going to pop over to Waterstones and buy a book on how to solve their debt problems. And also, as soon as you put it in print, it becomes out of date. You know, something changes in the world of debt. So after many years too late, really, I thought, well, actually, probably a website's a good idea.
It's free.
A free, yes, exactly. So I kind of sketched out a website, and then I thought, it started off, I don't know, we've got 20, 30 sensible pages. And I thought, I'll put in a blog post when something changes. And, you know, the first week somebody left a comment saying, what about X? I thought, I haven't written about that. So I wrote a blog post about that. And then somebody else asked about something else. And then there was something on the news. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So the blog posts have taken over. And talking about news and developments and what people can do. It's rapidly become, most weeks, I would say, at the moment, I probably do 2 posts. Certainly there was a period in the early stages when I just realized how much there was I hadn't covered when I was writing 3 posts a week, which is quite a heavy schedule.
Yeah, that's a lot of content around debt, and I think with the experience of how many people you would have spoken to in those years of being a citizen's advice and the number of sort of individual case studies that you probably came across, you probably had quite a lot of knowledge to draw from. What springs to mind is when it comes to debt, I talk to quite a lot of people about debt as well. It's not the only thing that I talk about, but I do get quite a lot of messages from people who, like you said, I get to the point whereby it's almost at the end. It's almost like they're forced into a corner. They have to now do something about it. Whereas, as we both know, actually, if you thought about this 2 years ago when you kind of just got on the line of maybe you could have budgeted your way out of it, or maybe there were some sort of things that you could tweak and you could get yourself into a better situation and then sort of in the better projection. What did you find from conversations and people that you've helped throughout the years? What would you say is the most common reason that people have found themselves in debt? Probably more uncontrollable debt than anything.
Almost everybody gets into debt in their 20s these days. It's not unusual to not have any debt, but it's really very common, starting off with student debt and student overdrafts. This just kind of gets people used to thinking that an overdraft is a normal part of adult life, and you get your first credit card, and you know, after you've had that year, you probably can't remember what you bought on it apart from pizza, but somehow it seems to be maxed out. This sort of debt is annoying to work through and expensive to work through if it's credit card debt or overdraft debt. But often it's a life event which tips somebody over from having debt which is taking up more than they would like of their salary to pay and kind of wishing it was less, over to the point where they can't manage. So this can be losing your job, it could be sickness, it could be pregnancy with then high costs of childcare coming in, it could be separation, or a business failure. So any of these can change a situation which was just, oh, that's probably more credit card debt than I would like to. I can't, no way can I actually pay the minimums on these credit cards, let alone actually start clearing them in a sensible length of time.
So you'd say it's more kind of like a bit of a creep over time where people aren't really realizing their minimum payments.
It can creep up over time, and particularly if you've got a good credit rating. So you can have sort of credit card debt on 0%. It can feel like it's not really something to worry about.
Free money, isn't it? That's what it felt like to me.
Like free, and your overdraft can feel like free money as well at the start, but it comes with the 39% interest rate charge.
Not so free.
Most of it these days. And then, of course, we've had COVID, and last year the cost of living crisis starting, and that took a lot of people who had never really had serious financial problems before, and suddenly put them in a place they had never expected to be, with the huge rises in the cost of petrol, and energy bills and food bills. These are things you can't really negotiate your way around too much. You can cut down what you spend on food a bit, but there's a distinct limit to what you can trim off. And a lot of people are finding the food prices have gone up a lot more than they can cut back.
Yeah. And I resonate massively with that kind of like, I never went to university, so I never got myself into student debt in that sense. But I can still remember as soon as I turned 18, those credit card application letters came through the door, and, you know, they know full well what they're doing. They know these are the people that are, you know, they're not in high paying jobs yet. And yeah, of course they want access to easy money. And I fell for it. And again, I couldn't tell you what I bought, but very quickly maxed out. I think my limit at the time was like £700. It wasn't even a lot of money really. But I very quickly maxed it out. And I moved house actually. My situation put me into a really bad credit rating very quickly. I moved house briefly after, completely being an 18-year-old, completely forgot about paying off that credit card. I think I might have potentially changed banks at the same time, but 2 years later realized actually they'd been chasing me for the last 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. Before you know it, I had my credit rating had taken a beating, and I had to I had to just call them up and say, look, I'm really sorry, I didn't do this on purpose, but I'm sure they would have heard that all the time anyway. And instantly my credit ratings dropped. And at the time when, you know, I was a couple of years away of potentially looking at buying a house or, you know, trying to just get financially stable, just such a silly mistake at the age of 18 with a bit of education beforehand would have really prevented that. And you know, that's my hope, and I'm sure it is for you, that the information that we put out there reaches these people before they need it. And that's the challenge that I certainly come across on a daily basis, is trying to think of ways to get this information that is accessible and digestible before people search it. Because like you said, people don't tend to look for help with debt or even personal finance in general until they're in a really bad spot.
Yeah. And by that stage, it's difficult to get out of, and having a bad credit rating makes it harder to work your way out of the debts as well. I mean, it's one of the things I didn't really expect when I started the blog and I started responding directly to people asking me to write about particular topics, was the extent to which credit scores were really, really important to people. So as a debt advisor, I would tell somebody what the implications were for their credit score if they went for this particular sort of debt solution. But very often people had absolutely no choice at all by that stage. I would say, look, you need to know this, and one of the things is, you know, about your bank and those sorts of arrangements, but sometimes often it's your credit score. But I would say you really don't have a great deal of option about what you do when you can't make the minimum payments to the debts.
You've got to stop the bleeding.
There are no solutions that will keep a good credit rating apart from borrowing some more. And the borrowing some more is a merry-go-round that stops quite suddenly when you actually can't borrow anymore, and you're by that point in a much worse position than you were before. But the importance to which people put on their credit scores, I think, surprised me, and the extent to which they weren't understood surprised me. So I've spent quite a long while on my blog talking about credit scores, not because I think it's the most important thing that people should focus on, but because if you don't talk about what people want to know about, they're not going to listen to the rest of it. And if you want to talk about debt, you have to talk in a sensible way about credit scores and the effect on those.
Definitely. Why do you think people put so much importance, or did when you started, and this, I mean, from my experience, they certainly still do now, why there is so much importance on it, and also why there is such sort of, because it's talked about all the time. You hear it on the radio, you'll see it all over. I mean, I have a biased Instagram feed, but I see stuff on credit scores all the time. Why do you think, A, there's a lack of education, and B, why there is so much importance on it?
I think there are three sort of interlinked problems here. First of all, it is insanely complicated, which makes it actually hard for people to understand what's going on. And if they just see one part of it, they think, okay, I get this looks good, I can recommend this to somebody else. So people don't understand that there are 3 different credit reference agencies in Britain, and none of them are better or worse, because people often ask, well, which is the best one? And they're all just do the same thing, but they've got different data, because most lenders don't report to all of the credit reference agencies. The big banks do, and the big credit card companies do, but a particular water company or a particular debt collector that deals with parking tickets, or a small lender, they probably only report to one of them. So if you're happily looking at a credit report and it's looking great, that's almost certainly only on one credit reference agency. So you don't see that actually there's a real problem over on a different one that you don't know anything about because you've moved house. So the letters about the CCJ have been going to your previous house, and either you don't know about it at all, or the first you do know about it on the door is where there's a knock on the door and it's actually a bailiff, because by some miracle bailiffs manage to track you down when the original lender says, well, I don't know where he's gone.
Strange, isn't it?
Isn't it strange? Yes. So that's one of the problems. It really, really is complicated. The second problem is that I think part of it's just terminology. We call it a credit score, which sounds really nice. Having good credit, having a high score, it kind of makes it look like you're a good person. If you've got a high score, it's not just sort of seen as a reflection of what happens to have happened to you in the past on repaying debts. Let's call them debts rather than credit. So that's another problem. And the third problem, which is interlinked to that one, is how people make money out of this, because you do hear a lot on radio and newspaper articles these days about credit scores and how to improve it, because there are players in this market who make money out of you wanting to know more about your credit score and trying to improve it. So there are a lot of free credit score reports. Lovely, you get a free report. You don't have to pay one of the credit reference agencies £9 a month or something. You can get exactly the same details on a free report, and the reports are fine, except that they're paid for by advertising. And the advertising on there is quite subtle. It is suggesting, oh, you may be eligible for this credit card. You look like you're eligible for this loan. If you took out this credit card, it could help improve your credit score. That credit may not be suitable for you. It may not be the cheapest credit available, but you're looking at this report and it looks like a tempting offer, and it's offering to improve your credit score. When you're not paying for something, as the saying goes, you are the product. It's you and your data that is being sold.
And it's not even that subtle. It is so confusing, and it almost, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but my word, you can look at this stuff and think they are making it very complicated on purpose. Because I used to religiously every month when I was improving, when I was getting out of debt, and watching my credit score go up. It was quite good to check in and have a sort of metric to go by to see that actually, not that I was going to borrow money, but to see that lenders see me as more attractive, which means I must be doing something right. And I logged into, I think it was the Credit Karma last month. And Experian, I've been 999 for a couple of years now. So like you said, if I just used that, I would have thought, oh, I'm perfect credit score. And then I looked onto theirs and I've got my score's at 50%. It's like 700 or something. I can't remember what their max is, but it's at 50%. There's no markers on there. There's no obvious reason why. The stats are the same, but from what I can see on Experian and on Credit Karma, there's no red flags. There's nothing to say. There's no defaults, nothing. But my score on that is significantly lower. And even it says it's lower than I think it was the regional average for me. Who knows? So why have they made it so complicated? Why is it not just one score? Why can't they all just get together and be reported to by everybody, everybody that's involved with debt or people that you owe money to Why can't it be simplified? Can you think?
That
Why?
is such a good question. So the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority that regulates lenders and the credit reference agencies, has been having a big study on the credit information market, as they call it. Everybody else calls it credit scoring. And it's put out a report which says, first of all, they are shocked, I tell you, to find the extent to which people's scores are very, very different across the different CRAs, and the extent to which the number of people who would have, say, a default appearing on only one CRA and not on the other two. So there could be errors in the data, and different information is reported to different CRAs. What people want is they want a single report, accurate, where it's easy to dispute something if it's wrong, that it's free, and that you don't have any of the advertising in it. That, I think, is what people want. Unfortunately, it's not quite what the FCA is recommending. The FCA wants to encourage more people to report to more credit reference agencies, which is good so far as it goes, but the FCA can't actually tell Thames Water who to report to. Thames Water isn't regulated by the FCA, so the FCA can't actually make it do that at all.
If you're starting a company, then you can cross business setup admin off your to-do list. OSIM has that covered. They'll get your business name reserved, your business registered, and pre-approval on a business bank account. Zero paperwork, zero hassle. So why outsource this to OSIM? Well, they're the only guys who will give you a literal human being at the end of the phone with any questions to help you get set up. Kind of like a startup wingman. You even get a dedicated expert at any time through live chat or just one phone call away. And right now they are offering just £12 company registration, which includes opening a business bank account. So if you're thinking of starting a business, let OSIM sort the registration and launch your company today. Okay.
And certainly if we're talking about much smaller local lenders or something, then it can't tell people what to do. And it's also ducking the issue of what people want to see. It's suggesting there should be a single portal into getting the information, which sounds better than signing up with 3 credit reference agencies. But having read the extremely long FCA report a couple of times, I can't tell whether you're actually just going to get 3 lots of data when you sign into this portal, whether you're going to get, here's the Experian stuff, here's the Equifax, here's the TransUnion data, or whether somehow they're going to pull them all together, in which case what are they going to do about the mistakes and the differences along the way? And the FCA is also ducking the question of what people want to see. I always tell people it's the data that matters, not your actual credit score, because unless you know what's wrong with the data, you don't know how to put it right or how long it's going to take until it approves naturally, because the bad stuff's going to drop off your credit record. So obsessing about your credit score and whether it's gone up 15 points or down 15 points doesn't really matter so much. But credit scores are vital in one reason. If you're checking, which you probably are checking now, your credit score every month, just casually, oh, it's gone up, it's gone down, right, fine. It kind of acts as a flag. You're not going to sit down and read the entire report every month. And if it's only gone up or down 15 points, you're probably not going to look at it in great detail at all. But if it dropped 100 points, say, you would say, oh, that's really odd. I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at it. So the score matters not because a 350 score from TransUnion says you're a bad person, Brian, or a 999 from Experian says you're lovely, but because it kind of summarizes the whole report and alerts you to any changes. But when the FCA are talking about a single portal to see your data, they're only talking about the data, and they're not, so far as I can see, talking about your credit score. So you would get this enormous report, because apart from when you're in your very early 20s and there's not a lot on it, over time when you've had different accounts and they've closed them and moved on to another account, these reports are big. You could easily have a 10 or 20 page credit report. Nobody wants to read a 20-page credit report every month to spot if there's been a change from the previous month. So the FCA isn't really looking at what's vital for the consumers at the moment, which I think it needs to do. And I'll be responding to the FCA's consultation saying this. It does recognise there's a problem. Its proposals for solving it so far are rather wet and not quite hitting.
And surely it's more beneficial, not even just for the consumer, but also for the companies who are trying to find people who are going to be reliable to lend to.
Absolutely. This doesn't suit the consumer at all, and consumers are mystified by it. But for the actual lenders, particularly smaller lenders, it costs them a lot of money if when you apply for a loan, they have to go through and look at your credit record with each of the 3 different agencies. So most smaller lenders, they just can't afford to do that. So the result is they're going to
take risk, aren't they? They're going to take a risk.
They're taking a risk. They're going to look at your 999 credit score and say, lovely. Or they're going to look at your 350 out of 710 on TransUnion and turn you down. Or they may give you a loan that's more expensive than it would need to be.
It's very inefficient.
It doesn't work for the lenders. It doesn't work for the consumers. The only people it works for are the credit reference agencies and all the different so-called free reports that make money off
that advertise heavily. So surely the FCA can have a pretty huge influence on the credit reference agencies to come together with some agreement. There's got to be some behind the scenes shenanigans.
It regulates the credit reference agencies.
So there's going to be some influence.
It can't make Thames Water report to what it doesn't want to report to. But it can make the credit reference agency say share that data. So if somebody reports into TransUnion will pass it across to Experian and Equifax. There are lots of different ways around skinning this cat, apart from saying we're going to nationalise you and just have one, which actually wouldn't be a bad idea.
Maybe not in this case.
There are lots of different ways to solve this, and the way the FCA is going at the moment, it will be a bit of an improvement because it would be hard to do a great deal worse than our current system. But they need, I think, to do a lot more. And this is so important to so many people.
Yeah. And it just makes me think even more. Every element of finance, money, personal finance is just made to be really complex. And I know there's elements that need to be, and financial advisors and people behind the scenes need to know those things. But they've made it so confusing at almost every level for people when it comes to their money and managing their money and debt in particular, which is why people do just switch off and just let themselves get into poor situations.
That's right. Yeah. So I've got a great example of this. Do you know that most mobile and broadband bills are going to be jumping in April?
Yes, I do. But that's only because I probably saw on your Instagram.
So people have got a current contract. You're not talking about going in and getting a new contract, which might be at a higher level because of the cost of living. We're talking about a contract for broadband, a 2-year contract, which you signed up to happily. There was a little clause in there which said that they were allowed to do an annual increase related to the rate of inflation. And at the time when you signed up to that 18 months ago, this may not have seemed terribly important. And it may have referred to the RPI inflation rate or the CPI inflation rate. Very, very few people know what the difference is between RPI and CPI. Nobody saw that and realised that their bills could be going up 10%, 12%, 14% in April. On a contract which they thought was a fixed price contract.
Yeah. And that's why we need people talking about this stuff like you, and obviously Martin Lewis does a great job of breaking down Martin
Lewis is great, and it's so good having him being on ITV to actually see money subjects being discussed on primetime TV is really, really important.
but it's good, but then it's not good that he's needed to do that. He's the go-to person, and he has been for so long, hasn't he, for most households in the UK. But the fact that you need that counter narrative on TV to almost fight against, the mobile phone contracts, the broadband, or even credit reference agencies, to have to simplify that. It should be within their best interest to simplify these things. But obviously financially, it's not in their best interest, because they're going to get their, increase by the rate of inflation this year. Yeah. But it should be the FCA. Why are the FCA not making more of a fuss to make sure that this information is more and more transparent to the everyday consumer? The fact that it has to be consumed by Martin Lewis's team and everyone else who, like you and I, that take more of an interest to try and consume it, distill it down into something that's a bit more readable and watchable for people to understand it, because most people just don't know these things.
No. So, I mean, on the broadband and mobile one, the regulator isn't the FCA, the regulator is Ofcom.
Yes.
And Ofcom has now last week announced an investigation into these rises. But this is only because Martin Lewis and the Times and other personal finance journalists have been picking this up and saying, this is outrageous for a mobile or a broadband contract to go up 12% when it hasn't changed. No consumer could have expected that when they signed up to their contract. And Ofcom have basically been asleep at the wheel, that they should have seen this coming, because debt advisors saw it coming, Martin Lewis saw it coming. But as the regulator, they should have been saying, first of all, well, actually, why do you actually need this inflation-linked price rise? You're only doing a 2-year contract. You make a good estimate of what it's going to cost you and price the contract and see who actually wants to take your mobile.
From my experience, debt played a huge role in how I kind of viewed the rest of the world. It put it through kind of a murky lens almost. When I was in debt, how I felt really affected everything I did, how I acted at work, how I acted in my relationship, how I just went through day to day with this sort of like anxiety in the back of my mind that, we can call it money anxiety. It's just the fear that at any point, if something happens, like a life event, even if my tire burst in my car, that would really spiral me down massively. And that kind of anxiety is like, it's not to be sniffed at. It's something that actually causes a lot of pain. And now more than ever during the cost of living crisis, where everybody's feeling the pinch of cost of living everywhere rising, I think everybody's kind of getting that a little bit more than they used to. But now put on top of that, somebody who's got credit card debt or loans that they can't afford to repay, or car finance that they're stuck in, or what are your thoughts on the sort of mental health aspect of it and how it kind of affects people's day-to-day life?
I think somebody's got mental health problems and debt problems, they're a real toxic mix. Depends a bit on the nature of the mental health problems, but some people are more prone to try to spend their way out of a problem because it's one of the few things they know that can, bring them a spark of joy, is going and buying some new clothes or something. That obviously makes your debt situation worse. That puts more pressure on you, more stress on you. That can make it harder to do a good job at work. It can make it hard to focus properly. So it can actually affect your earning power. You could end up off sick because you're just not up to coping with the world. So things can go very badly wrong very fast. And if you've got real mental health problems, this is a major, major problem. But one of the things about the cost of living things is that it's just, I think, raised a general level of anxiety on people who have never really had mental health problems. And COVID also perhaps kicked this off, so that there are a lot more people that find that a lot of the joy has gone out of their life and that they're living a very stressful, anxious life because of not necessarily the bailiff at the door at the moment, but the fear about, how are you going to cope if the car needs new tyres, or your children all grow out of the school shoes at the same time. And we're not then even talking about the people who have got genuine problems where they have no idea how they can manage to pay the rent, feed the children, and keep the heating on. These are hugely stressful times. And it does affect people's mental health, and it does affect the economy overall. It's quite short-sighted of the government, I think, in many ways, to try to force people who are unwell to go back to work and put pressure on them by cutting their benefits. If you're having trouble feeding your children and paying the rent, that is not actually made better. It's not as though you're sitting around all day and enjoying life. And, if your benefits are cut, you might decide, well, I'll go out to work. And so that's not the way it works at all. When you're struggling and you don't know how to go to work and get the kids to school because the local transport is so awful and you can't afford to run a car, these are real problems. The cost of childcare is huge. And the government is taking some very, very short-sighted decisions in trying to look at how to push people to get back into the labour market and work more, when part of the problem is long-term health problems and things like transport and the cost of childcare. These are real big problems, not ones that an individual can easily solve, which the government should be looking at those rather than taking a stick approach to benefits, which doesn't improve anyone's mental health at all.
No. And I think even people who have relatively sort of a healthy mindset, they haven't got any mental illness, like myself, for example. I mean, I would say I'm in a reasonably good financial position, yet when I go to the petrol station and put fuel in the car, I get a surge of anxiety every time I look at the price. It might be because I spend so much time thinking and talking about this stuff, but every time I look at it, instantly I'm like, it causes me a bit of stress. And then I go into the supermarket, and the cheese that I was buying 2 years ago is £1.50 more expensive, and I'm really aware. And every time I see those little price increases that are creeping up every single month, it seems to be getting more expensive, I can feel the anxiety on me. And I would say I feel okay. So the people who are in a position where they're not okay, what would you recommend they do? I mean, of course, the onus heavily is on the government to ensure that we drive inflation down and try and prevent but what at an individual, because there's only so much we can control the government other than by voting and lobbying and all those things.
You've got to do the best thing for your family.
Absolutely.
As well as sort of hoping that the government's going to make some better decisions.
Definitely hope the government do so. Definitely hope they do.
So
but
first of all, if you've got debts or big financial problems, I think it is important to try to face up to them and not just get through to the next month by buying something essential on a credit card or buy now, pay later or things, because that actually just makes the next month even harder. So if you've got a partner, you need to talk to your partner about this. It's so important to actually make these decisions together. Very often in a couple, it's one person that tends to deal with the money thing, but both people need to be on the same hymn sheet and really be aware of what needs to happen and keep track of what's happening to your debts. People often think, well, I don't actually have to use my credit card, I just use it because it's convenient, because I get a bit of cash back, and it's supposed to be good for my credit record, and all sorts of reasons. But it's just sort of useful, but I could stop if I wanted to. Try to stop. If that's what you're saying to yourself, just make the next month one where you are not going to leave your credit card at home. You're going to take it out of Google Pay and Apple Wallet. You're going to take it off Amazon and PayPal, so you're not paying by accident on your credit card. and see if you can get through the whole month without borrowing more. If you've got through the whole month and you haven't used your credit card, you've made the minimum payments, and your overdraft hasn't got worse, you know you can manage the minimum payments. That might not be great. You might still have a real problem when the tyres need to be replaced, but you know on one level you are just about getting through each month. But if you can't do that and you find you're having to borrow, that's the point which is a real red flag, and the sooner you take action, the better. If you've just got one debt, if you've just got one big credit card debt, or you've just got a huge overdraft, you can talk to that creditor if it's not too scary. You can talk to them, you can say, I can't afford this because of the cost of living increases, and ask them if they can freeze the interest and allow you to pay less each month. But if you've got several debts, or you've got real anxiety about the whole idea of talking to Capital One or your bank on the phone, talk to a debt advisor. Debt advisors are really sympathetic. We can help you look at your options. We can write some of the letters for you, or give you a draft letter you can send off, and we can talk through all the pros and cons. When you talk to a good debt advisor, you're always in control of what is going to happen. You'll be suggested various options you can take, and the pros and cons will be decided. But a good debt advisor will never push you to sign up for any one of these, even if it's completely obvious to me what somebody should do. It can't be my decision. It's not my life. Somebody often needs time to think about things. So good places to talk to your local citizens advice, any other local advice agencies being run by your local authority, they will often be very good. Step change, national deadline, and if you're self-employed, there is a great national debt advice service just for self-employed and people who own small limited companies called Business Deadline, who specialize in business debts and personal debts and how the crossover between those. So any of those, great people to talk to. If you ever find yourself talking to a debt advisor because you clicked on an advert on Facebook or Instagram, and you find you're being pushed towards something, and they're saying, can you sign up? Why can't you sign up? I know this will really save you money. You need to sign up. As soon as somebody's trying to push you, put the phone down. Stop communicating with these people. These are not proper debt advisors. They are trying to get you to sign up to, there is only one debt option which makes people a lot of money in this country, called an IVA, and they are trying to force you to sign up to that because they will make large fees from it. Any pressure, you just put the phone down, step back, and don't give up on the idea of debt advice. Go and talk to one of the big national debt charities that I've mentioned.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me, not that I'm saying those companies are scamming people, but it reminds me of scams, because all it takes is the right place, the right time, for somebody, like you said, to stick it into Google, help with debt, and the people who pay the most money on the advertising get bumped to the top, which are going to be these companies that are making profit. So they are the ones who are going to get the footfall, and they're the ones that are going to be, sometimes maybe an IVA is the right decision for you, but like you said, you need that impartial advice, don't you? You need somebody to not be pushing you one product. You need to speak to somebody who can give you all your options, and then, like I said, like a good counselor wouldn't give you the solution or what they believe to be the solution. They will just get you to talk out loud and give you the options. That's
right. So yes, an IVA is suitable for some people, not very many people, because it's not terribly flexible, and when with inflation that isn't very good. But if an IVA, if you've got assets to protect and very large amounts of debt, then an IVA can be the right solution for you. And so if you've got somebody like National Deadline or Citizens Advice saying you could do a debt management plan, it's going to take a very long while. In your case, I think an IVA would be better. Then you could be sure that it's the right decision for you, and you're not just being sold this because somebody wants to make £1,200 in referral fees by selling your details to an IBA firm.
It's terrible, isn't it? Absolutely terrible. There's two things that you mentioned that I wanted to briefly talk about. One was credit cards, and the other one was buy now, pay later. What, obviously both debt, one I think is a lot more evil than the other, but what are your thoughts on credit cards firstly?
Credit cards can be useful. If you want to pay for a holiday and you can't pay for it all now, but using a credit card will let you spread it over the cost of this year, that's probably not a bad idea, and it's probably not going to cost you a fortune. The problem comes where you put this year's credit card holiday on the credit card and you're only paying the minimums, and then next year you're putting next year's holiday on the credit card and you haven't paid off the previous year's. So a credit card is a tool where you just use it and you repay it in full at the end of the month. It's lovely. If you're using it to spread the cost of something big, such as a new lawnmower or a new sofa or something, or a holiday over a set number of months, you think, yeah, I can't afford £600 for this now, but I'm happy to pay £610, £620 over a period of months. That's good. It's a good tool, and you know what you're getting into. But when you're only making the minimum payments for a long period, those debts take 15 or 20 years to actually pay off. It's the credit card minimum payment trap. Every time you make a minimum payment, the next month has dropped a little bit. It's not dropped enough for you to think, oh, woohoo, I'm better this month. It's only dropped 60p or £1.10. You don't really notice the minimum payments dropping a little tiny bit. But because of that, they're keeping you in debt for a lot longer. So you may think, oh, if I make the minimum payments, surely it'll all be gone in 5 years. Nope.
They're a terrifying calculator.
Very long time.
And I never heard that. I never even considered that until I started looking, at personal finance myself. And it is terrifying to think even a balance of £1,000 can take you 15 years plus to pay the minimum payments off. Yeah. And people just don't even think about it because they just think I can afford it because I can afford the minimum payments, but they're not thinking the psychological impact that's going to have on you you just getting used to seeing that payment go out to that credit card company every single month, and you're more likely to spend more money in the future. It's just they know what they're doing. They've put so much money into working out what the best minimum payment is to keep you trapped for longer, and then market, send you emails every single month to say, oh,
so your balance is going up. Limit.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So it's no, I mean, I was burned by credit cards. It was me who made those decisions. So like you said, it's a tool at the end of the day, and it can be used for good and bad. But I think if you have ever had a problem with debt or you struggle with impulse buying, credit cards for me are just an absolute no-no. I think if you can design your financial life to just spend what you have in the bank, you will be forever in a better position for doing it. And I think people who convince themselves, like you said earlier, people who convince themselves that, yeah, I'll just put the petrol on it and then pay it off each month because it's going to improve my credit score. Well, then, recession hits or COVID happens and you lose your job. And then before you know it, oh, okay, I'll just continue to put the petrol on the credit card. And before you know it, you've maxed it out. And I just think it's, even though it's a tool, it's a really good way of just keeping stuff hidden in the background and never checking the balance and just seeing, like I said, the minimum payment maybe going up slightly because you spend a bit more money, but it's not relative to having thousands of pounds in your account and maybe £50 coming out each month. It doesn't, your brain's not thinking I've got thousands of pounds worth of debt. It's just thinking I can afford that £50 as a minimum payment each month. It's a very personal subject to me. And I try to be impartial with credit cards, but I struggle to.
I think so. I mean, you mentioned earlier, that you got one, I think age 18 or something, which is just so common, really, really common. And there's a lot of research now which says that young adults' brains aren't fully formed at that stage. They're still adapting. And at that stage, you haven't really lived on your own. You haven't had to budget for buying toothpaste. There's just always been toothpaste there because your parents have bought the toothpaste. Suddenly you have to buy the toothpaste and the loo rolls and the things you had no idea you were going to be spending your salary on when you thought about it at the start. There's a case for saying that people, and also at that age, you're very susceptible to peer pressure. It matters so much to you what your friends are doing, that you can do similar things with your friends, that it's hard to sort of say, no, I can't afford to do that. When your friends look like they're all having a great time, even though they're probably putting money on the credit card too. I think there's actually a case for saying 18 is too young to have a credit card. I won't make myself very popular because, of course, there are beautifully financially responsible 18-year-olds that can cope with it. But those aren't the people that the credit cards are after.
And the marketing budget, with these credit card companies, it's insane. And they're going to start universities. You go around for Freshers Week, and it all starts there. They will buy you a pizza, and get a free pizza. Sign up to the credit card. It shouldn't be allowed. And the fact that the research, I can't remember the university in America that did the research, but how the pain receptors in your brain don't even go off when you pay with credit cards versus paying with a debit card, there's a little bit, but paying with cash or having some sort of tangible transaction makes you think, oh, I've lost this money's now not mine, and now I've got something for it, as opposed to I've got this thing and I haven't really lost anything because all I did was tap it on my my card or my watch or whatever. And that for me is the most terrifying sort of the way the direction is going with contactless, and the fact that I'll link it into the buy now pay later, actually, because how long is it going to be before your smart watch gives you an option when you tap it to pay in installments? That's not far away.
No, and there's a lot of jokes about let's pay installment for our petrol and things, but actually we're not that far off it. There is, you can use buy now pay later to pay for grocery shopping and things, and even you can use a credit card. Yeah, you can use absolutely essential, your pizza delivery. Why
pay now?
Yeah, exactly. Why pay now when you can split it? Because it sounds so sensible.
Of course it does.
Particularly when you say there's no interest. That sounds like the sort of sensible, grown-up decision as to how to manage your finances, not paying interest, spread them out, and it's way too easy to get in too deep. As a result,
it makes it's the justification for almost everything that I find now to put on finance is the 0%. And they all know it. And all the car finance companies know it. All the credit card companies know it. You put an offer for 0% on and you're going to get people, running at them to try and grab these cards and take loans out, because it seems, like you said, it seems like the sensible thing. People go, oh, you took a loan out, it's 0%. Again, it feels like free money when we all know it really isn't.
It isn't, particularly when people are having trouble budgeting because the cost of living pressure. It can, and if you're using several buy now pay later things, it can be very hard to juggle the payments which are going out. Even if in theory you think you should have enough money, some of the payments are at fortnightly intervals, some are 4 weeks, some are a month. You've got a whole raft of things going out which is out of your control. When you were talking about mental health earlier, one of the things which is best for your mental health is to have this underlying feeling that you're in control of what's happening to your life. And that's the opposite of using buy now pay laters.
Kicking the can down the road for payment is not the solution. And last time I did some content about buy now pay later, they didn't have to communicate with each other. So you could, like you said, you can go to Klarna and they don't know whether you have, multiple accounts open with ClearPay and PayPal, Pay in 3. They don't know that. I don't know if the regulations changed yet. I know they were pushing for it. But I think it's a bit like the credit reference agency scenario again, where you have all these multiple people with different interests all making money to some degree. It's almost not in their interest to do a national search to see, okay, well, you've already got sort of 2 accounts open with buy now pay later, and this is your current limit. We're not going to lend you any money. Whereas it seems like up until very recently, they just, the approval was pretty simple.
Yeah. So they are bringing in regulations to regulate buy now, pay later, because they've been going through what looks like a loophole in the laws that they haven't actually required to be regulated by the FCA before. It's taking a very long time to get this sorted, partly because the loophole wasn't there by accident. They didn't just suddenly find this mistake in the law and decide to go through that. But this loophole was there for a very good reason. It was so that firms who are not lenders as part of their main business can allow somebody to spread the cost of something. So if you buy a gym membership, your annual membership is often spread into monthly payments. They're not making a profit out of this. If you buy a new kitchen, the kitchen will often let you spread the cost of it over 6 months. If you buy a season ticket for a football club, you can spread the cost of it. Nobody wants every football club, every gym, every kitchen installer to have to be regulated by the FCA in order to offer what is a sort of sensible spreading the cost of an invoice over it. So they've been trying to work out the rules and to bring it in so these people whose main aim is to get you to borrow money are properly regulated as lenders. It's going to be a while before we've got the full FCA regulation coming in. That's still at least a year, probably 2 years off. They are starting to appear on your credit records, though. They're not counted in your credit score because of various complicated reasons, but they are starting to appear on your credit records. And already we're hearing anecdotally that mortgage lenders, surprise, don't actually like you spending a lot of money on buy now, pay later. And if they see those on your bank statements and they see them on your credit records, it's going to harm your affordability calculations for a mortgage. So in a way, the credit reference agencies are going to be good there because they're going to help that. But it's very, very slow going.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of people in the meantime, certainly 18-year-olds like me. I mean, if buy now, pay later was available when I was 18, I 100% would have used it.
Yep.
And they're going to get burnt in the process. And then when they get to the point where they want to buy a house at age 22, 23, they're going to be on the back foot. And that's...
No, you spend the second half of your 20s trying to clear up what happened in the first half. Is such a common situation.
It is a shame. And I really hope this legislation goes in quickly, because I see genuinely on a daily basis, I've made a few videos about buy now, pay later, and it's like the people who use it love it, obviously, because they can get what they want instantly and don't have to delay that gratification. They can get it and pay in the future. But those are the people who just haven't been burnt yet. And sadly, I think they will, because whether they just managed to buy some new trainers and a lot of them actually, sadly, are talking about using it for buy now, pay later, just for groceries. And I know you mentioned it earlier, but that is something that is becoming more and more common. And I think supermarkets and people who offer it are going to do it under the guise of, we want to help people because they're struggling. But all you're doing is getting a profit off selling things and then pushing people into debt.
Yes.
Terrible. You mentioned one thing, last thing I want to talk to you about is about debt policy, because it's something that, although I talk about money quite a lot, I don't know a huge amount about as far as the options, the main, and you've briefly talked about the three. Are those the three, if you wouldn't mind just quickly recapping them? When people come to you with sort of major debt issues and some of the solutions, the IVA being the one that you say is probably the most advertised and potentially the least applicable to most people. What about the other two, and what sort of general situation? Obviously, it's not specific advice, but what sort of general position, what would people be into that would be applicable?
So obviously, once you actually looked at whether you could help somebody get more income, or whether they can, pay less for some of their expenses. When you're down at that point to people not being able to make the minimum payments to their debts, you're into some form of arrangement with your creditors. Now, that can either be, if your situation isn't too bad, if you could repay these debts if they weren't charging interest. Then you can look at a payment arrangements with credit cards and loans, or you can look at something called a debt management plan, which is kind of a formal version of payment arrangements, so that you would pay Step Change, the biggest provider of debt management plans. You would just make one payment a month to Step Change, and they would divide that £180 up between your creditors, and they would pay those. And the creditors are asked to freeze interest. It's not compulsory, but they almost always do, especially at the moment if Step Change are asking them. So payment arrangements and debt management plans work well if the problem is the interest that is being added. But some people have got into a situation where their debts are just too large for that, whether because they've just grown suddenly, or they've had a business failure, or they've lost their job. And they've got, even if there's no interest added at all, it's still going to take 10, 15 or more years to pay them off. And at that point, you have to look at the sorts of insolvency options which are available for them. Everybody's heard about bankruptcy. And IVA is there as a more unusual option where you've got assets to protect. It costs more than bankruptcy and goes on for a lot longer and fails quite often, which is why, if bankruptcy will work, it's normally a much better solution for you than an IVA is. And there is a third option in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, which people haven't heard about so much, called a debt relief order, which is like a simpler, quicker, cheaper version of bankruptcy for people who have very little money left each month after paying for the essentials, and who don't own a property or a car that's worth more than £2,000. So a debt relief order can be a very simple option for those people. It gets you the clean start. It really doesn't mess up your credit rating. All the insolvency options do, but it gets you that clean start so you can start again and rebuild your finances.
There's a lot of options, isn't there? And there's a lot of sort of, even as you're talking then, even though you've simplified it, it still sounds confusing.
It shouldn't be confusing when you talk to a debt advisor, because the debt advisor is going to rule out the ones that just won't work for you at all.
No, that's true.
So, if you've got a house with a mortgage, a debt advisor is never going to mention a debt relief order to you, because it's not relevant. A debt advisor will only really talk to you about the ones which are relevant, and they can make that easier by just directly talking about your own situation, rather than using the sort of abstract language of what would happen here, what could happen there. It's much easier when you're actually looking at one person income, expenditure. And so I can talk to you about, well, Brian, you think you've got big problems at the moment because of some physical health problems. Are they likely to be much better in 3 months, 3 years, or not at all? That, once you've got those an answer, that again will help a debt advisor make a sensible recommendation to you. They might say, you're probably going to be okay in 3 to 6 months. All you need to do is get through to that time, and payment arrangements with your creditors can be a great option to just get you through to this. And this is a letter that you can send to your creditors to ask them to freeze interest and get through. It's tailored to what you want. So it is complicated when you try to describe all the options.
So I think what I get from that is basically talk to somebody, and that's two birds, one stone almost, because you almost get a sort of feeling of counselling because you're verbalizing, you're facing the truth almost. And for me, that definitely worked when I kind of knew I was in debt but didn't really know how much, and just kind of like went through life just thinking it'll be okay. It's always, this is my experience with it, and when I talk to people who are in debt as well, even if your situation is worse than you thought it was, you still feel better by verbalizing it to somebody. So by calling, either Step Change, National Deadline, or Citizens Advice, just to speak to another human being who can sympathize with you and can say, well, okay, it's okay. These are options. This is the way forward. You're almost two birds, one stone there. You're actually getting the help you need for debt, but also you're making yourself feel better because you're realizing there is a way out rather than just kind of internalizing it and potentially Googling all debt problems. And then, like you're saying, being overwhelmed with all this information. Yeah. You're speaking to somebody who can actually give you that sort of tailored advice.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Perfect. Sarah, thank you very much for your time today. Where can people find you, your blog and your Instagram if they want to find out more?
Okay, so my blog is debtcamel.co.uk, and on Instagram and indeed Twitter, if Twitter's your thing, I'm at debtcamel.
I have to ask before we go, what's the reason for Debt Camel?
It's really hard to find a good name for a blog. All the good names have been taken.
Yeah.
I didn't want anything which is incredibly long. I didn't want it to sound like it was just sort of, you could wave a magic wand, debt wizard or something like that and get rid of debts. And I didn't want to make it sound like I was a big national debt charity, because I'm not. I'm kind of writing common sense advice here. So I got the whole blog sort of mapped out in my mind and no idea on names. And then I bought a card for my mum from Moonpig, and I thought, if they can make a complete commercial brand out of something which has not even got the word card in it, all I've got to do is I've got all the word debt in it. So if I compare this with an animal, I've got the idea for a logo, because I've got quite a cute camel logo. So I just kicked around animal names. We talked about panda. Panda was quite big. My kids fancied wombat for reasons I never quite worked out. But camels are good. Camels are very sensible animals. They can plod on for a very long while through the desert and conserve the water on their back. And what I like about them is they spit when they get cross. So I do get quite cross when I talk about debt policy.
It's certainly memorable, and I think it's a smart idea because people will always remember where to go to get your information. And I must say, I know I said in the beginning of our chat, the information you put out there is very useful, and it has digested and simplified a lot of the stuff that even I research quite often for videos that I make. I will certainly be going to yours for any updates in the future because it's very readable, and I recommend anybody who is either in debt or has an interest in the subject to go and check out your blog and your Instagram.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah.